Right, just in the nick of time, His Worship the Mayor.
Councillors, the staff responses are on pages 4, 25, 31, 32 and 56, so they're spread out a bit, I'm sorry, by topic.
Good morning, gentlemen. Your timing is impeccable, as always. And may I suggest at the end of this, if you wish to stay for lunch, you're more than welcome here.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity.
Just a reminder, you're on film as well.
Yeah, no, all good.
We have gone ahead with it, unlike others. Yeah.
Yeah, no. Mr. Chairman's got a tie? Oh. Thank you for the opportunity to submit, and we've read the officer's recommendations. There's not a lot to add to those. They're actually supportive submissions, particularly around hill country afforestation, oil and gas exploration, and the Whakatū Road Rail Hub, which are really supportive submissions. I noticed in the officer's comments around oil and gas exploration, the requirement to sort of work together around how we manage oil and gas exploration, which is a highly contentious issue, but we reiterate our position. The Hastings position is, and we've outlined this to the Minister, that we actually don't want any oil and gas exploration on the in the Hiratonga aquifer, so we're trying to preserve the aquifers. It's fair to say I think the government has a slightly different view on that, but that's our current position. In terms of the other material that is in the submission, I really want to get to the issues that relate to both the Regional Facilities Fund, which I understand Mr McIntosh has presented to this morning. Our submission is largely supportive of that, and we're waiting on further developments, and then we'll come back to you. But the big one we wanted to talk to you about, and I want to thank members of your staff who came to Hastings last week, is really around the regulatory approach around land use on the Hiratonga Plains aquifer and the impact that changes to resource consent conditions and plans have meant in that regard. And Mr Maxwell came and spoke to us last week around tank, I think it's called. Is it your tank option, which is a really good way of actually sitting down and having a conversation about the trade-offs of water quality, land use, etc. But we're signalling in here principally that in the past we've only worried really around potable water supplies and our ability to get consent for potable water. We are now going to take a more interested role in land use impacts that occur from changes to water use plans and consenting. And so we will participate in that process, whereas in the past we've largely let fruit growers and other affected people try to deal with that. The last one really is in a regulatory sense, and once again it's an attempt to be helpful. The most recent drought highlighted some issues, particularly in the Twyford area where the new plan kicked in for the first time. And there was quite a lot of tension between the growers and the new provisions, even though they've been well signalled. And our view is that in a period of drought, just like we do with a whole lot of other things when we declare a drought, if there is some way of dealing with consents on an override provision by some sort of independent panel that might look at a consent being varied for a short period of time, which will deal with the drought condition to allow the crop to be harvested, and then they go back to their normal consent conditions. Now, my advice from our staff is particularly environmental interests. You actually could cover off the balance of the mix and allow short-term variations, which would allow, in drought conditions only, some sort of flexibility in the consent conditions. And it seems to me anyway, when we look at what's happened in droughts and we make all sorts of provisions to deal with welfare, bringing in feedstock, doing a whole lot of other things with winds and all sorts of people, there is one thing that we've never had a serious look at, and I know at some of the meetings I attended with Ian Maxwell and others who are constrained by the current law around what consents can and can't do. Seemed to us there was a lack of flexibility. I'm not being critical when I say that in the regional council, it's just how the act's written. And if there was a way of effectively allowing some flexibility on a case-by-case with some sort of independent panel, that might be a way through. So that's really all. That's all we wish to say in our submission. Mr. McLeod, have you got anything you wish to add?
Could you elaborate? I'll kick off. If you could you elaborate on a specific example of where that committee might have made a difference in this?
Yeah, I think, for instance, in this case, there was conversations about where water was, for instance, in the and Mr. Maxwell, correct me if I get this wrong, between the semi-confined and confined aquifers, and whether you could take water from one part to the other. I'm aware of the other issue, which is the peach orchard that everybody seems to talk about in the Toki-Tok, who apparently, if they'd had water for another week, could have kept their harvest. Most of it ended up on the ground. And I was saying, if those sort of things could be considered by an independent group of people, then some judgments could be made on that. And while the augmentation processes were worked as well as could be in the Twyford situation, it seemed to me that we're always coming up against what the consent says, and we got into things like, I think once again, Ian, correct me if I'm wrong, but if the well was flowing freely, you could transfer water from a well into an open channel, but if you had to pump it, you weren't allowed type things. And those types of things, I just wondered if there was we wondered if there was some flexibility in a declared drought. We understand that the Minister of Primary Industries or Environment can override consent conditions in a certain case, but probably that is a big drama. A whole lot of reports have to go up to Parliament. We're trying to say, is there a shorter, smaller way that could be incorporated in your plan, which allows some sort of flexibility under certain conditions?
Okay. Questions?
Yes. Just apropos that, Your Worship. You've referred to tank, and it's good that you're aware of it. Are you aware of your staff's involvement in the tank consultation? And have you actually been able to have discussions with your staff members so that these issues are aired within that stakeholder strategy group? Yes,
we have. The issue, though, in terms of our tank work, I don't think our politicians were aware of tank until, and the significance of it until Mr. Maxwell came across. Mr. Clues who's advising us principally on this stuff, has advised us and did ask us whether we wanted to make submissions on these things, and had to get clarification from the council, which is the first time we really put it in writing as to the types of positions we'd wish to adopt. And most of those actually stem from the effects of changes, from not only changes to the plan, but also changes brought about by this year's drought.
We have made a submission on Plan Change 6 in the sort of context of the comments the Mayor is making.
Thank you. Councillor Dick.
Morning.
Morning.
What would you think about a proportion of the Regional Community Facilities Fund, unallocated, being applied to car parking at the Hastings Regional Hospital?
Well, our council position is that we don't support the regional council funding car parking at the regional hospital at all. That is a unanimous position of the council. So I can't imagine that they would want, regardless of the funding source, the money to come from that fund.
The question was a little tongue-in-cheek.
I understand that, Councillor Dick.
Other questions, Councillor Rose?
Thank you for coming. I listened with interest about the comments around the drought and the consent conditions. What you're really asking us to do is say that in certain conditions a irrigation ban is not a ban. Is that really what you're asking, isn't it?
Well, potentially. So, but I think that's taken to the extreme.
Because I think we're all familiar with the area just out of Twyford. I think that's the one you're probably alluding to.
I am alluding to it, but
just if I may finish here, the problem as I see it, if we instigated some panel or some other authority which was oversight of the consent, wouldn't that then open the door for every other person who was pressurised with water to seek the same relief? So, in effect, our ban system really would become inoperable, because if you gave away in Twyford, you immediately would have every other every other consent holder who was pressurised seeking the same relief.
I understand that is a risk, but what I'm really getting to is I understand the Twyford work that's been done in the new plan is the first bit. There's likely to be others as consents are renewed, and what we're saying is in certain areas of drought, when it's declared, you can make a specific application, and that would be a reasonably high threshold, I would think. That you couldn't just because you felt like it. It would have to be worked through, and I think the work that's being done on tank, and I support the work that's done on what I more call corporate consents, where you've got a term for it, Andrew, what do you call it? Global consents is the right way to go. But it seemed to us, and when I watched from a side, that what you could do in terms of flexibility was limited by the Act, it was limited by previous consents, it was limited by a whole lot of things, and I felt if you could find a way to put in your plan under certain conditions that there was effectively a small appeal process that could override conditions for 10 days or something, that could be something worth pursuing. Now, that's all we see it, and there would have to be officers' reports and all that sort of stuff, but it could be quite a quick process. Now, whether you can get that through under the RMA is the challenge, but the intent is to try and provide some local ability to respond in very difficult adverse circumstances.
No answer. The Brookvale bores, what's the council's view of that at the moment, of where you are with that? And
well, we're going through a consenting process to upgrade them.
The current ones?
Yep, correct.
We're also looking to optimise the management of our network so that there can be less demand placed on those when it is an issue. But yeah, we are going through that consent process at the moment as well. $3 million is a terribly big sum of money. Yeah,
we think this might be more than that actually.
We're hoping to find a way to try and minimise that, but yeah, that was.
Righto, thank you guys, and thank you for your fulsome submissions. Very good.